Do you GM with the philosophy, Kendall asks, do you GM with the philosophy of combat as sport or combat as war? If it's war, how do you do that well in Pathfinder 2e? Great question. Traditionally, historically, it depends on the game. When I was playing 3rd edition in Pathfinder 1, it was almost always combat as war. In fact, there were plenty of fights in Pathfinder 1 where, I mean, I can just think of a couple off the top of my head. There was a room, it was full of like animated torture equipment, animated Iron Maidens, opening and closing, trying to eat the party, and animated, chains and whips. And the party basically cast like a hemispherical wall of stone around themselves, and then used stone shape to make little arrow slits. And they had a ranger who had enough feats that they never took penalties to their shooting through cover. And basically they created a bunker in the middle of this room. And these animated objects weren't intelligent. And I just said, okay, we don't even need to roll dice. Like, you destroyed them all. They're beaten. They're destroyed. Smart idea, well executed. We're not even going to roll. Like, you just had a better plan and you win. That really works well in Pathfinder 1. When we played 4th edition D&D, I tended to play it more as combat as sport, where this was more of a game, because I wanted the choices and all the sort of debating that you're doing about choosing one power or one feat over another. I want that to matter. And I would say, actually, Kendall, that friction between liking both of those styles of play is one of my personal demons that I deal with as a GM and as a player, is trying to figure out what sweet spot I want in a given game for the balance between those two. Because, I like board games that have well-defined rules. I like Magic the Gathering, which has well-defined rules. And part of the fun of that game is it's like a puzzle, trying to figure out how to win with the confines of these rules. But at the same time, part of the reason I play role-playing games is to think outside of the box and to come up with interesting and cool solutions so that it's not just a normal game. But I also understand that when I do that, it can sort of take away from the importance of making all those other choices and decisions, which a game like Pathfinder 2nd edition has tons of those. And so I think it is important to understand that what the game is trying to tell you to say. So to that end, I think Pathfinder 2 very much leans more towards combat as sport. That being said, if it is war, how do you do that well in Pathfinder 2nd edition? Well, I think the best way to do it is to kind of use my hero point system, which is simply to say, and again, this isn't my system, it's Pathfinder's system, I'm just applying it in different ways. Pathfinder 2nd edition has a lot of instances in the rules text where every player gets some sort of ability where their saving throw will say, if you roll a success, it's treated as a critical success instead. If you roll a failure, it's treated as a success instead. But there are also some abilities, monsters and spells, that might say something like, if they make a save, treat their save as one category worse. You'll see that in certain afflictions, diseases, certain monster abilities. I think with the way you could bring that into Pathfinder 2 is if people come in with a really good idea or a really solid, strong plan, or a bad one, then what you can do as a GM is say, okay, well, that is such a good idea. You all are so well equipped for this ambush that you all can make your stealth checks, but treat your category of success as one category higher. And in the first round of combat, treat all of your attacks as one category higher, because you have such an advantage. So basically, no one's going to miss, more or less. Tons of people are going to crit, and it's going to feel like this overwhelming advantage. And don't just give that to them, make them earn it, or because they came up with a really good idea. And you say, okay, that's going to work. That is definitely going to advantage. If they come up with some brilliant way to deliver a poison to a key NPC, villain or enemy, or not, when they go to make their fort save, say, you did such a good job, that NPC is going to treat their fort save as one category lower. Basically almost guaranteeing that it's going to work, and quite frankly, probably going to critically fail. And that could give them the sort of really big effect that they really wanted. The The other element that you need to think about is like what kind of conditions are people going to use. So I saw Bruce Cat mention a morale check. I think fighting to the bitter end is pretty common in combat as sport, pretty common in a lot of games, actually, honestly. But I think if the party members understand that this is more of a living world and that monsters and stuff will run away. I mean, like another example to do, I've done this before too. In fact, I did this early in the Rise of the Runelords game. The fighter, Gore, came in with an intimidating strike, and he hit a critical hit against this goblin. And the critical hit, the damage, doubled, killed it. But of course, critical strike would have made him with a crit, with an intimidating strike, frightened 2. But of course, the monster was dead, so it's not frightened 2. But I was like, that just seems like such a wasted opportunity to come in and sort of the lead goblin gets hacked down in one blow with an intimidating strike. And so, yeah, I made all of the other goblins frightened 1. And you could also do that too. Like if you have a lot of monsters, maybe consider using more monsters than would technically be allowed by the encounter budget. But as the party starts to kill some of them, they become progressively more frightened. Maybe you have a threshold that when the first monster dies, all the other monsters become frightened 1. And then all the other monsters eventually become frightened, and then if something else happens, they become frightened 2. And then eventually they become frightened 3, fleeing, which is kind of like the final effect of fear. And that could represent the enemies routing or running away. So I think that... I think there are ways to use the rules of Pathfinder 2 and just apply them in a different way. I got a lot of mileage in my game out of like the doomed and drained conditions to certain things. Like that's not just a combat as war. That's like a D&D a game as war. Like in my Abomination Vaults game, I had a wizard who had they were arcane wizard, but they had like an occultist sort of background. And they wanted to make an occultism check to sort of do something really weird to a haunt, okay? And they wanted to make a skill check to try to transmute the haunt and make it so that even though they hadn't defeated the one thing, that the haunt wouldn't return. And I said, okay, yeah, totally cool. You can make your check, but here's the deal. If you succeed, you'll be successful, but you're going to gain the doomed 2 condition until you can actually release the haunt, because that spiritual energy is sort of resonating within you. So a lot of combat as war is about telling your players the price and then asking and just putting tough choices on their plate and saying, okay, I'm here. I'm listening to you. I'm hearing what you want. Here is my offer. Do you accept? It's a negotiation. Now your players might balk, they might balk at that. They might say, that is way too high of a price. And they might say, okay, let me try a different approach. What if we did this instead? And you could say, okay, that does change things. That sounds like a better idea to me. Now the price maybe isn't so steep. It's only doomed 1. And the players go, okay, yeah, we accept that. That is a reasonable price. So tell them the cost and then ask. And then if they don't like that cost, they can either walk away or they can come up with a new way or a new approach or a new idea to sort of try to shift the price of that back in. Now, by written, there is no way in Pathfinder 2 to do this, but I did it all the time. And I still do it all the time, where I will just say you are clumsy, you are drained, you are doomed, you are whatever. And then set the narrative condition that has to occur for them to recover from that. Could be a long night's rest, so maybe it's just something that's going to bother you for today, or it could be something that's very specifically narratively true. Like you need to accomplish this goal in order to, cure that condition. And then it makes the player say, okay, I'm going to have to interact now with your game to figure out a way to deal with that. So